Do you have high expectations of yourself? Do you push yourself to do the best? And do you also tend to be a little bit self-critical from time to time? If you said yes, you might be a perfectionist, and you might be interested if I were to tell you there is actually a way to keep the benefits of being a perfectionist, like being driven, being motivated, accomplishing your goals, but whilst also avoiding the costs of perfectionism, like being self-critical and even experiencing depression symptoms. I'm Maddie Ferrari. I'm at UCID doing a PhD on self-compassion. So what actually is self-compassion? I'd like you to think for a moment about a time today when things went wrong. For me, you're actually looking at it. I put this background on Zoom and I have no idea how to get rid of it. But moments like this are breeding ground for self-criticism, right? The self-critical voice popped up for me. Maddie, you're an idiot. No one is going to take you seriously at this FameLab thing with a frozen background. How could you be so ridiculous? Why did you put it on there in the first place? But I know for a fact that if it was a good friend who I cared about, who I loved, who I wanted to see do well in life, who was in this situation instead of me, I'd never say those things to them. I'd be supportive, I'd make jokes, I'd put it in perspective. I'd say, look, even if you've stuffed up, I still think you're a wonderful person. And self-compassion is all about directing that compassionate wisdom that we have that we send outward to other people, but turning it inward to ourselves. But what does the data say? So some colleagues and I ran a large study with over 1,000 participants online, and we got these participants to fill out questionnaires. So firstly, we looked at perfectionism and depression. And unfortunately, we found a really strong predictive relationship there, meaning that if you're a perfectionist, you are at high risk of developing depression symptoms because of that self-criticism. But when we looked at the group who were very perfectionistic and also had high depression, we looked a little deeper, and this is where it got really interesting. In that group, the people who had low self-compassion had a very strong link between perfectionism and depression. But for the people with high self-compassion, that link was actually broken. So what's interesting about that is you could retain the benefits of being a perfectionist, like being driven, being motivated, but the pattern with high depression symptoms was broken. They didn't also experience depression. So what this tells us is that for the perfectionists out there, keep doing your thing. But if you can start to also practice a bit of self-compassion, especially when inevitable failure comes along, because we're only human, that will actually protect you from the costs of perfectionism. So my final comment is, if you wouldn't say it to a good friend or a pet who you really cared about, like Leo here, then why are you saying it to yourself? Thank you.